for joining us this afternoon. It's such a beautiful day, and now we get to hear the words from a very amazing artist and her beautiful work. I have some biographical information about Erin that I would love to share. And then I took the liberty to write down some very esoteric, rambling thoughts that I'm going to use now. I'm going to indoctrinate you all with this nonsense, and hopefully a bit of it makes sense. Erin will just compose a much more sort of linear explanation of her work. Erin Smith was born in 1980, raised in St. Paul, Minnesota. In 2003, she received her BFA in product design from Parsons School of Design in New York City, and in 2021, an MFA from Alfred University. Incredible CV, lots of experience. I'm going to narrow it down to a few key points. She was an artist in resident in 2023 at the Kohler Arts and Industry in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and in 2021 at Sculpture Space in Long Island City in New York. Tons of exhibitions, some highlights, the Walker Art Center, Concordia University, Rochester Art Center, Cooler Gallery in New York City, and the Center for Contemporary Crafts in Houston, Texas. Awards and commissions, a McKnight Foundation grant in 2018, an American Craft Council Emerging Artist Award in 2017, one of my favorite awards, a mini golf hole commission at the Walker on the Green at the Walker Art Center, and juxtaposition arts with the Jerome Foundation, a Gate Commission. Erin Lynn Smith's work, though a celebration of process and rich with evidence of material transformation, is, in this author's opinion, an illusionary expose on the power of technology as a vehicle to enhance multiple distinct iterations of an object through the limitations of software. Often, the technology inhibits clear reproduction, and this is not a bad thing. By surrendering the authenticity of the original object, and reproducing it as a scanned file with crude digital approximation, she has captured the sourced object, reducing it to the bare minimum elemental essence needed to recognize the original while providing viewers access to a new dominion where hybrid objects emerge. In this world of transformation, individual pebbles become terrain. Lamps mimic the cords which give their bulbs electricity. Coffee mugs are anchored to the table with heavy architectural trunks of 3D printed clay monoliths. What was once clearly an object rooted in function, the viewer is now denied complete access. It is here, in the absence of the object's inherent and historic function, that the real use of the work is felt. Commentary on craft, the history of ceramics, and the denial of implied function gives way to a new paradigm by which I ask myself, what is real? And to that end, certain things like singing pickles, for example, suddenly this plastic approximation of a brined vegetable can become amusing, and we can enrich our lives through this process. And today is a day of enrichment, and it's also Barbara Sharkey's birthday. She turned 29 today.
brownstone row house throughout most of my childhood, installing all the plumbing, electrical, and gas. My brother and I ran wild in this environment, as did our imaginations. This staircase in particular had a carved triangle wood panel near the base. It was about 3 feet in height and was removable, revealing a cramped crawl space under the stairs. It took a few seconds of flickering before a buzzing circular fixture lit up the tiny space. This was my laboratory. Inside, a drywall soffit first chemistry set lift. It was a vacuum-formed plastic shell with mostly empty vials and slots for miscellaneous missing chemistry equipment. This didn't deter me from my important work. Starting at the table, I'd shave bits of crayon and pastels into a Dixie cup, then sprinkle some deteriorating drywall edge in. Never forget the crumble of the styrofoam. Next, I turn around to face the cracking plaster wall, where I carefully insert a stick into every disintegrating hole that was left by a nail. I'd burrow the stick into those holes daily, slowly gouging them bigger and bigger, knocking the grit into my cup with the rest of the material. Where the plaster had completely cracked off the walls to expose the underlying brick, that's where the good stuff was. Mortar bits, little pebbles, pulverized red brick dust. Now the concoction was ready for tap water. I'd place these cups all over the house, outside to evaporate or in the freezer, and eagerly I'd check the results from the previous day and repeat the process. I wasn't trying to solve a problem here. I was just working really, really hard, iteration upon iteration, searching for a discovery. So this is an image of that house that I grew up in. My parents are still in. They bought it in the 70s and did all of the renovations on it. That's kind of the environment I grew up in. So they were handy people. And as I was writing this, I was asking my mother about her memory of it. She crawled, my 85-year-old mother crawled into the space and took this photo, and it was kept as a little time capsule. So you can see my memory was pretty accurate in how I recalled it. So I think the last time I was in there was I was 10 years old in 1990, and my friends and I signed the walls. So I grew up with, my mother was a graphic designer, an artist, and a potter. She kind of started my love for pottery at a young age, and then my father's a businessman and a physicist, and they're both very, very handy people. Obviously, renovating the whole house and exposing that to me as a child. And that explains why I ended up getting my bachelor's in product design, working with tons of materials and falling in love with materials. That brings me here. This is, 2016, I think I became interested in neon. Definitely had an artistic career before this, but this is a great place to start. I wanted to make a base for those neon sculptures, and was thinking of circular, modular pieces that could adapt and work with lots of different forms. And so I thought hamster tubing was probably the best way. So I went to a pet store and got these, filled them with plaster, cleaned them off, and then made slip cast molds out of them. So multiple slip cast molds that I was able to work in any kind of way. It was almost limitless what I could do with it. And that my first kind of collection came from that, with multiple neon sculptures then. And I was looking for a way to make these sculptures more affordable and available to people. So I started working on incandescent lamps. And I made hundreds and hundreds of these, all different, obviously. And that, since I'm working with slip cast molds, that was able to translate into other objects as well. These are my chub mugs, as I like to call them. I couldn't make enough of them. People are still inquiring about them now. That's right, I know. But I started a business probably 6 years prior to this, selling online, and this just continued. My business, I probably ran for about 10 years, till I started feeling like a machine, making the same things over and over. It was definitely nice to make a living off my art, but I became pretty tired. And these are some of the pieces that I made over the years. And pay attention to these slides because they will appear again later the ideas branch and they always come back to the same thing. So I have a lot of branches to my practice. 2019, I started becoming more interested in using those molds towards sculpture. And that's also when I was feeling pretty tired of making these functional sellable objects. And that's also when I applied to grad school. So 2019, I ended up going to Alfred, and also that's when the pandemic hit. So a lot of time was spent in online classrooms. A lot of time was spent glued to social media. And I developed this relationship with social media. I feel like it was a little unhealthy. I became maybe skeptical of a lot of things. My first year presentation of my work ended up reflecting that. I was looking at a lot of these kind of optical illusions, things that appear one way on the screen, on the flat screen of your cell phone or the computer, but are something else in reality. Which, I feel there's a lot of, I don't mean to be negative, but there seemed to be a lot of falseness in social media that I think we're more aware of at this point in time. But I was looking in ways to toy with that fakeness and looking at optical illusions, at dazzle camouflage, which if you don't know dazzle camouflage, it's what was used to mask the direction of ships that were used during World War II. They would paint these optical illusions so you didn't know which way the ship was sailing or how fast it was going. So really playing with blinding ways of glazing things, when in reality, the backside of this piece is unglazed and something totally different. And I'm just showing one face to that piece, so that other side is always a mystery. Penrose Triangle, this is a sculpture I made where it seemingly, you can't tell which face is which. And the actual sculpture, I tapered it in a way that viewing it head on, you don't know that it's a three-dimensional object. It is a three-dimensional object, but it's a toying with an optical illusion. I played with using light-absorbing paint. So this was a cold finish put on a piece, which hides the actual object itself. And then light reflecting techniques, or light reflecting surface treatments, which would actually refract light and obscure things, which a lot of people were using in clothing and avoiding paparazzi, etc. with. So really I was thinking of these two worlds at the time. One, being connected online with friends, and two, I was escaping and going into nature. And those were two comforting, yet the online was jarring, but I find comfort in nature. And I find comfort in this digital kind of interactions with friends. I started bringing those natural elements into the studio, so there were a lot of rocks that ended up in my studio. And I'm attracted to the rock because it is this opposition to that digital world where there's no weight, there's no up or down, and then the rock is just representative of weight and earth, and ceramics also. I brought wood in, another natural element, with hand techniques as well as machining techniques. And then trying to sort of bridge the two, creating something on the computer and then giving it a home in these sort of very natural wooden, but semi-unnatural because it's very digital looking. But I've had so much fun figuring out the shrink rate of this piece and getting it to match in there. That's like really a love of mine, is figuring out exactly how much things are gonna shrink. And then, you know, the tools in my studio became the things that would transfer things from my computer into the real world. So on the left was my first plastic printer that I bought and assembled, Prusa, and then the clay printers. And this is a typical scene in my studio. Multiple computers and a huge bag of bubble water. Using so many different kinds of techniques to kind of merge the real world with the digital world. So I was playing with VR, I was building, going back to my education as a product designer, building things in CAD and then bringing them into reality through plastic printing. These were some cups I made where it's a thrown cup, very, very thick. I wanted everything that was in the real world to be, and that I made with my hands to be heavy. So these cups were, you know, an inch thick at the base. And then I created feet that would go onto them with plastic printers. On the left, that was a thrown base that I used a saw to get the same kind of texture that the 3D printed top was. And then these are some of the mugs I was making at the time, meshing all different kinds of techniques. So 3D printing, clay, plastic, hand throwing pieces, making giant blocks of heavy clay, and really working with like a heavy base of something that stays put, and then you have like some other lighter object that would work with it, that maybe was 3D printed. These are some sculptures that I extruded a solid base and then 3D scanned them to get the exact angles and everything that I would need to continue the design in a software program. So the parts that match them, I wouldn't have been able to create unless I had initially made those 3D printed or the extruded pieces of the base. Wedging clay and then 3D scanning it, working with multiples. So multiples come into play in my work a lot. I love that on the computer screen you can copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. I think that's why I love slipcasting a lot too, because it mimics that sort of world too, where you can have these replicas of each other. This is another piece that I made where I went out to our favorite spot around Alfred. It's next to a creek where I 3D scanned the rock. You can see on the left there, I'd have to include some kind of measurement so that I could get the exact size of what that scan was. And then again, figure out the shrink rate of the clay and then make sure that those fit in the end. It's so satisfying to me. This is what the base of those pieces look like. And then I turn them into these sort of, you know, gas station mugs, where I even had a hard time finding where these pieces went. So I sat in the spot where you're supposed to be having the coffee or whatever, and took a photo from that mug and realize I need to be sitting in this spot and then try to find where the mug sits. But it was requiring you to really be aware of your surroundings too, and of that like physical place you're in. The kind of additives that happen when you're 3D printing, the support structures became really beautiful to me, and they became actually part of the art itself. These are things that the printers or the slicing program are coming up with, so it becomes like generative in a way. So I started including them into my pieces. This was a slip cast mold I was making where I left the kind of structure on it and then made a mold of it. So it all became one piece at that point. I ripped some of the support structures off, made stamp tools to put that texture into things. It almost becomes like this beautiful weaving of a mind. And then also just those support structures inspiring the work itself. So I tried to mimic what I was seeing in the support structure and then 3D printed sculptures that are inspired by that. And then on the right here, that's my head with what is necessary to actually print out the head. The left here, that's if I were to plant my face down, that's the support structure that we need to print my face. So I'm looking at not the face itself, but the space surrounding my face, and that support structure that was needed around my face. I would remove the object. So I scanned in this rock on the right, remove the object from the slicing program, aside from a small sliver of skin, and then that became like a resting point for the rock. Here I go with my face. Put it on the wall at my exact height, and then I could press my face into it exactly.
Was it strange to fit on your face?
I had to measure how, the shrink rate for it. And then, seeing things from my studio in nature as well. So this was taken in Rochester, New York, and I was noticing this beautiful ice on the rocks, and it was mimicking the plastic kind of skin on the rocks that I was scanning. Also noticing, like, on my walks in St. Paul, the structures that we had to build to hold up nature itself. These were some small sculptures I made where the emphasis is really the support structure. So I scanned in these small rocks and then created the support structure that was needed to print them. I made it on both the top and the bottom, and the top I turned into a porcelain. I made this kiln furniture, so I hand-carved kiln furniture and made it so that those top porcelain pieces could then slump down and react in the kiln, and then they became these like almost like hats for the rocks. I think that one of my favorite things about 3D scanning is that I'm able to explore new spaces. So I scanned my body in. I'd always wanted a bed that formed my exact body. scan this piece in and then blow it up and then actually make it into a bed. That's like maybe the next iteration of it. Again, playing with that I can now explore the spaces that are unseeable. With my scan, I made this kind of Richard Notkin-esque couple of vases that show my profile. But really, I took QR codes. I made QR codes of all of my presence on the internet that doesn't exist anymore. So I went to the way back time machine and found old websites and old blogs and turned them into QR codes and then glazed them in a manner that they started melting. So again, that's like this digital version of myself that doesn't exist anymore. Here, it's like face swapping with Joe Biden. This is something that comes up a lot in my work, exploring these kind of filling techniques that AI does. So if you pay attention to the wallpaper in the back, like I love these kind of discrepancies. It is generative, it's beautiful, and it actually speaks to the time that we are living in. I mean, it's at this time it was unable to replicate that pattern, so it places us at this moment in time, and that's something that if I continue working with technology, my work will continue to evolve as technology evolves. I was scanning a lot. I still am scanning a lot of rocks. You guys will see me doing this a lot in the next year. But these are 2 rocks from Central Park in New York, which I 3D printed. They're hovering above these mirrored surfaces so that you can see that support structure that's printed underneath it. And then I love the mirror because it's this flat surface and it's implying its past life. So this object used to live on my computer screen. And I'm reflecting it back on another flat surface. Thinking of these rocks as like skins. So taking the skin away and just printing out the support structure as another like space. I'm like exploring parts of these objects that I hadn't been able to explore without using this technology. This is my 3D printer, Maxine. I have her in my studio right now, and this is the largest rock that I printed a couple years ago. It was lucky that I was working outside and it was 100% humidity. This was a 30-hour print, and I would have to pause it, go home and sleep at night, and then come back for the duration of 4 days. And it was raining every single day. And had it not been raining, the prints from the day before would have shrunk, and then the next layer would not have fit on top. So that was like a lucky accident. And now I'm just like, I'll print that in parts. I don't need to, pause it and come back for 4 days. But this was the final rock, which I glazed in RBG colors. So I tend to do a really blinding glaze application, and that is again referring me back to this kind of flatness of working on a computer screen. So the LED, RBG, I think this, so 30-hour print, and then this took me 50 hours to glaze. I just love putting my hand into it, and I love having these blinding, flattening patterns that I add onto my pieces. So the glaze you can see is kind of following those print lines. And those are giving little indications of the process. Same with on the left, the glaze is really following the printed piece underneath. That is pre-glaze on the left. And more pieces where I'm playing with a magic eye here, which is another really blinding. I've never been able to see them, but those magic eye posters from the 90s. So all around that time, I think it was 2019, this is my friend Rich, who's my good buddy, was getting his PhD at Stanford at the time. And in his free time, he helped build a generative adversarial network. So that's like GAN, it's AI. And we plugged all of my prior work into it. So like 10 years that I was running a business, we plugged all of my work into it and wanted to see what it would generate that would be like my work and kind of make my future work out of it. These are some of the initial images that it was coming up with. Some of them, I like to say these are like embryonic images. The more time you give it, the closer it's going to get to creating pieces for you, but I loved kind of freezing it in this embryonic stage because it felt the most unlike my other pieces, and they felt just very surreal. So I was picking an image out of these and deciding to explore them individually. So hand building the pieces that I chose. And here's a few that I ended up making. And interpreting in different ways. Like I have the freedom to interpret this in any way I want. So here's a couple that I decided to stick with more of that flatness that you're getting from a two-dimensional image. But playing with cutouts, playing with different volumes add. This piece you can see in the square on the right. And this was hand-built and slab-built, probably about that big. And these are images from my pieces show. So that's the other side of the piece, which, I just have one side of the piece to look at. And then I have complete freedom to do whatever I want. I mean, I always have complete freedom, but I have the whole other side to play with. And I just kind of intuitively built. How'd that get in there? Happy birthday, Barbara. So that all leads me to this work that I created at Kohler a little over a year ago. And I mean, we're in a place where AI has exploded. It's a really hot button topic right now. But I still think it's like incredibly powerful. I kind of see it as this zeitgeist or like collective consciousness that's taking all these images from our past and using them in really surreal ways. So this work that I created at Kohler, I'm using new forms of AI. I'm a child of the 80s, as Matt pointed out. I mean, just like consumer culture, that was the time when businesses realized, oh, we can have a cartoon show, and then we can create this entire world with all these toys that these kids are gonna demand. So that's like, that's the era I grew up in. It is in my unconscious, it's in my everyday. And I think that there's a way to access that with AI too. So this is an example I did where watched a lot of Monty Python growing up. So I plugged in a Monty Python image, and I plugged in my old piece created from the generative software. And these are the pieces that came out of it. So again, I'm left with, okay, I have a two-dimensional image that I'm looking at. So I began to sculpt them, and I started with foam, and then I layered on plaster, and then would carve away the plaster. And I made 7 sculptures in this way in 3 months in a really hot garage in Minnesota. And then brought those forms with me to Kohler to make plaster molds of. The molds themselves ended up probably being about 300 pounds. So we had to use these pulley systems to lift them. And I'm a very solo worker, and I'm realizing I don't know if I ever want to work that scale again if I have to use plaster molds, but I needed help in order to actually lift these molds every day. And this is the piece that came out of it. So what you're seeing is those 2 images. I made 2 molds out of them and then assembled them together in the end to become a full sculpture. That checkered surface is indicating the nothingness. That's in like Photoshop when you have a blank area, it's this checkered area. So that's referencing that, and it's kind of indicating that that doesn't exist. And so that is on all of these pieces. Here's an old He-Man advertisement along with that sculpture again. And these pieces came out, and I was like, oh, this is definitely work that I want to make that feels like it's hovering in the back of my head. So I sculpted those rocks. I had to separately sculpt the rock and the He-Man figure and assemble them afterwards. And I would have to make them on these drywall panels and then carefully tilt them up to end up assembling them later. And then this is how I would airbrush on the grid on the back. So I hand cut this vinyl, and then I'd have to spray it on, move it over a little bit, and then spray it again, which was awful because the underglaze burned off in the kiln, and then you could kind of see it, and then I'd have to hand cut the squares again at a shrunken, like 11% smaller than the last one. So I spent many hours just sitting there cutting. And then that's the final piece for that one. Really uncomfortable making a Ronald McDonald sculpture, but came out of it. So I made everything that came out of that residency. I made one version that was color and that really was similar to the image that I was working off of, and then I made a counterpart that was this, like, the blinding lines that I paint on things. And I think it probably took about 10 hours to glaze one side of each piece. Another kind of reference that I like to go back to is Max Headroom. He's kind of inhabiting this. I'm going to turn it off before he says anything offensive, but he's in the 80s. He is inhabiting this faux digital world just as we are first experiencing it. You know, like it's it's nothing that we understand today, but he's kind of the first person to, I mean, he's a man, a physical man in a costume that's supposedly inhabiting this kind of digital world. Oops. So there's a black and white image of him, and then I was prompting AI to create its own image of Max Headroom, which is just off, and that's what I love about it. And from those creations, I turn them into a three-dimensional printable file. So this is a plastic print that they made for me at Kohler. It's about 2 feet by 2 feet. And then these are some of the other pieces. And then I made slip casting molds out of these. And these are the final pieces I made. But they're not done yet. I thought they needed to have frames. So I brought a photograph of the piece into Photoshop. I had it generative fill add on the size of a frame, and then I took that extra AI created frame, and then I turned that into a 3D file that I CNC'd out, and now they're finished. But I love that part of the process, like really, I don't know, maybe I'm overdoing it, but I love it. Also just asking it to generate like a cola logo. Here's the McDonald's kind of piece that you saw in the earlier. But using that cola logo, which doesn't say anything, and here, this is the glazing process. And then again, working with the multiples. So the top one is glazed.
Yeah.
Again, the frame was made the same way. This was one of the generated pieces where it was sort of bleeding, the images were bleeding into the frame. And the top piece is glazed with the stripes. The bottom piece, I had stained some of the slip and slip trail lines in it, and then poured the regular porcelain slip over it. I mixed my sculpture with another 80s toy, Lots of Legs. And this is the piece that came out of that. So my process then was, how do I make this into something that I can bring into the physical world? So I turned it into grayscale and assigned white depth and black depth, and that way I could extract some kind of information out of it. And that's how I made those 3D files that I could then print out. And then these are the frames that came from that. And this is a little aside, but I'm coming to the end of the talk here. But if you saw me working here in the wood shop, this is the stuff that I just recently finished. I went back to the pieces, those Magic Eye pieces, and realized they weren't finished and made frames in the same way. So these are on exhibit in LA through the weekend, if anybody ends up at Felix Fair. And that's the top. Here you can see this is kind of visually how one piece transformed over the years. So I believe that piece that I worked off initially was this planter that I made, back in 2015 or something. But yeah, I'm ready to take questions if anybody. Yes, Curtis?
Are any of your neon lamps still available?
They're all gone. I kept one for myself.
You didn't save one for yourself?
I saved one for myself.
I think it would really look good here.
Yeah. More questions?
like the current state of AI, the climate impact that it has, and then
Yeah.
like the ability to create like such alarmingly real fake photos, do you see that changing your work at all?
I mean, I don't see myself using it that much, you know? Like, say if we find better ways to use AI, I can revisit. But I don't see this, you know, like I said, this is a branch of my work, and I could revisit it later when the technology is different, when the technology is better. You know, maybe someday we'll be able to generate three-dimensional objects, and then I'll revisit it too. But yeah, everything's evolving. At this point in time, I'm okay resting with it. But yeah. Yeah.
What are you working on now?
Now, I'm preparing for a show that's gonna be in November, and I'll be working a lot with the 3D scanning rocks and making iterations and building structures out of repeated rocks. That's what I'm really excited about. And then bringing in some other elements like metals and wood into that. Yes.
Just seeing the overview of your career, it's great to see all these three-dimensional objects, and I totally get why people want to exhibit your work so much. It makes so much sense. I'm wondering, do you find like there's a challenge for all of us? We're sitting here in this room and we're looking at these three-dimensional objects in a two-dimensional format here, and it's a little bit weird because your objects almost defy the two-dimensionality of us sitting here looking at the screen. So, like, they just get flattened, and it's like it's funny because you're taking these two-dimensional things, making them three-dimensional, and then you're translating back, and you're translating. It's very good, kind of hard to it.
I love that though. Like I've given this talk through Zoom, and that's like my favorite thing. I'm like, you guys are getting a weird version of this. I mean, it's all balancing those two worlds. Yeah.
It's flattening.
It's
Weird what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm also trying to flatten on the three-dimensional objects.
Yeah,
with my
exactly. Yeah.
Yes, Connor?
For the Dazzle camera, was that mainly all done with like a slip trail bottle, or did you have other glaze application
Yeah.
techniques?
I was using a slip trail bottle and realizing that it was taking so long, so then I ended up designing and 3D printing a tri-nozzle slip trail bottle, so that sped up my process like threefold. Yeah. More questions? Bring it up. Yeah.
Could I ask something else about your like 2D and 3D earlier in your talk, and it's also on your website, like with your lamps, they have these colored backgrounds. And sometimes on your website, and once in the talk, you pull back the camera and you show us the colored background you're using. Could you talk about your process of doing that, why you did it, why you showed it, and then the importance of the color in relation to the lamps themselves, whether you feel that those lamps are the lamps, or is the photograph with the background color of the lamp will work?
Well, you might not like this answer, but those photographs were really documentation for my prior life of having this online business. So a lot of that was just for display purposes on my website to, you know, the colored backdrops. And I think showing a following back view where you're actually seeing the setup. I mean, I'm outside of that world now, so showing kind of the
For a lot of the rocks you did, and especially with the support structures, did you ever find rocks that were too challenging to make, that you chose one that you thought would work out great, but then it failed? Or did all of them go accordingly?
No, I was really like, I don't know if anybody else does this, but if you go on a trip or something, you collect rocks, like you find these things that speak to you. I was choosing ones that I was like, this guy's got character, and I'm gonna scan it in. And it got to a point also where I'm like, I don't necessarily need to take this, I don't need to take this home anymore. Like I can grab a digital snapshot of it and leave it in its place. But I always chose ones that I was like, this one seems interesting to me. There's lots of angles. I think that it would, I wasn't choosing based on easeability of printing, you know? I would print it and figure out a way to print it. So I have a whole system where I have little pieces of drywall that are cut at different angles, and I will prop them under and follow my print. So I'm sitting by that print for, 30 hours and making sure that things aren't falling over by placing blocks in it. But yeah, the rock first, and then figuring out how to print it comes next. Joe.
So I want to preface really quick, because like, I notice in the way that you have used like newer technologies and the kind of artifacts and the charm maybe that comes with them being like new and not as developed or mature, maybe even the tools themselves. You like lean into that a lot and celebrate kind of with the new eyes of the person using that. Maybe like the support structures or a crude rendering of a scan in printed clay. With your maturing as an artist with these tools and with the tools themselves developing so much from like a 1, 2, 3 catch a scan versus polygon, for instance, or whatever. What tools are you interested in or excited about now as they've gotten better? Because that charm feels like gradually AI's getting better at matching the pattern in the background or whatever else. You know? But like, where do you see, like your interests aligning with maybe the newer technologies that are as they're advancing? And does that so resonate, or like do you make a U-turn because it's getting too good?
It resonates, but also I think that being open to that change from the beginning, I don't know where the technology is gonna go, so it's hard to say where my interest is going to end up, and I think that's just the way it is as an artist, you know. I might get bored of working with it, and that's okay. But I mean, right now I'm still interested in using my camera to scan things, or I mean, I'm always going back to like process. I'm always going to bring in what I've learned in the past. So whether the rock I'm 3D printing today is like has more fidelity to it versus the one before, I'm just gonna accept that and let it change with the technology. But I don't know where my interest will take me. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I know.
Avery.
For your like generations in AI, did you just like keep pressing generate until you liked the form, or was it the first go?
Totally. Sometimes it was the first time.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, I mean, that's where you come in as like the artist, and like my eye, like I had to choose something that I liked. Yeah, it's like a collaborative project, I guess. Yeah. Diego?
I was gonna ask if, do you have like a specific piece that you're most proud of, or like a body of work that you think is like your legacy piece?
I really loved all those small little rock sculptures. I felt like I whipped those out really fast and was really happy with them. They reminded me of it changed pretty swiftly. It started out very negative, and nobody wants negativity, and nobody wants negativity in art. I mean, it has its place, but I didn't want that. I went home. I went to Minnesota for the summer that after COVID started, and the George Floyd murder happened at that time, like blocks away from my house, and I was able to like see the positivity that like people were coming together virtually and see that spin of it becoming this positive force to gather people, and it really made me just pause and be like, okay, it's not a completely like negative space. And I think that those two worlds are melding. Like the more we move forward, like they're completely melding, and it's just something that we're accepting. And I think it can be a pretty beautiful thing too. Exploring those worlds. Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing. I'm like literally nearly choked up over right now just because it's incredible work.
Thank you. Yes.
Do you prefer for people to view your work with or without an explanation or context?
I used to think that things needed an explanation, and I heard a great quote from Ron Nagel. I'm not going to quote it because I wouldn't give it justice, but it basically let other people get what they want out of your work. It is what it is to me, but I think art in itself is what anybody takes out of viewing some art. And I feel pretty strongly now that things don't need explanation. Like I'm creating because it feels good to create, and I don't necessarily think it needs explanation. If somebody wants to sit and listen to me talk for an hour about it, I will do it because it's like my world. But yeah, I think that art is powerful in itself to like speak for itself. Yeah. Emerson.
I have a question about your rocks, and I don't exactly know how to ask, because I collect rocks,
Yeah.
and I collect them kind of on the basis of like, does this rock have stripes in it? Like, what kind of rock is it? And it seems like you collect them or choose rocks more on the basis of like the space they take up and the angles they have. Do you ever see yourself doing work with rocks that are that are like where the focus is less so on the like shape of the rock and more so on like the patterns or qualities that the rock has otherwise?
So, let's see if I can get to my website real quick. I I've collected rocks like on trips, and they're sort of memories, you know. I love rocks with patterns. I love it. Why am I putting www? Never go to erinsmithart.com, by the way. Oh no, it's not me.
Never.
So I had collected small pebbles based on their patterning and things. So these were hand-built, larger pieces that I was really playing with, enjoying the patterning that was happening on them, and then translating them in whatever way I wanted, like my brain wanted to do it. So this is from, you can see that pattern rock there, but yeah, I love a pattern, and I think that actually, my next projects I'm doing, so, all around Wisconsin, when I was at Kohler in Wisconsin, they have an incredible collection of, folk art, and there's a lot of, locations around Wisconsin that have these sort of, homages to religion, to the farmer, and they're all made out of rocks and plastic bits, and I'm gonna take inspiration from those for this next body, and I would love it if everybody just picked a size or shape and tried to collect pieces that I can like mosaic on my next pieces. So, yeah, I'm just looking for the same rock of many different versions of the same rock, so I can use that in my next art. I was realizing on the beach, I'm like, this is